Fractions on number lines. Here we're going to examine a number line and how we can use this to show fractions, which can aid us in operating addition and subtraction and so on. So we should be familiar with a number line. Often they start at 0, as shown on this one. And starting with whole numbers, we would be familiar with having it divided up into segments and each segment showing a number along the number line. So here we have just an example counting up to 4, and we can see the arrow could take us further and further along. And this is just a whole number line where we could then use this for jump strategies, to add or subtract, and apply it in our maths. So we can do this with fractions as well. So on this particular whole number line, I can add in halfway points in between each whole number. And so now we've got mixed fractions, a mixture of whole numbers and common fractions alongside. So half, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5. And so this is a simple example of fractions on a number line. So let's look at that number line a little bit more closely. Here, if we look at this particular example, we might be given a number line that doesn't have the labels on some of the lines that are separating out each section of the number line. So here between 0 and 1, we have a notch or a line, and then we have another one between 1 and 2, but we're not actually told what fraction this is. So how would we solve or know what fractions belong in these positions? Well, what we can do is we can actually box off the distance or gap between two whole numbers. So here between 0 and 1, I've boxed that off. And I can box off between every whole number afterwards if I like. And each one of these is one whole. So if we look at each of these wholes, we can sort of get an idea of what fraction we're looking at based on where that middle notch or middle line is. But just to be a little bit clearer and to take us through the process, returning just to the 0 to 1 gap, to work out what that line in the middle is, we need to count how many gaps there are, because these gaps are the distance being travelled between the numbers. And we can see there are 2 gaps. So there are 2 jumps or 2 large distances being travelled between 0 and 1. So we have 2 pieces. It's broken into 2 pieces. So what fraction is cut into 2 pieces? Well, of course, this is an obvious example. And we can see that these 2 pieces would be true between every 2 whole numbers, and they're halves. And we'd record that with a denominator of 2. So we know that that's 1/2 in the first position, and then between 1 and 2, it'd be 1.5, and between 2 and 3, 2.5, between 3 and 4, 3.5, and so on. And we can keep counting as well, knowing the pattern and what lies ahead. Okay, now let's look to a new example, because we just went through halves twice, which was pretty obvious. But let's see what to do when it's not as obvious as the one we just went through. So here we have a whole number line that we're familiar with, 0, 1, 2, 3. However, it's broken up. And if we look between each number, there are 3 notches or 3 lines breaking up the gaps between each whole number. So we've got 3 lines there, and this can easily lead to confusion because we think 3, we might think thirds. But let's look closely at how we go through the process of working out what fraction type this number line is broken up into. So first of all, let's just draw a bar or a rectangle box between 0 and 1. And this can represent a chocolate bar or a fraction. And it's showing the gap between 0 and 1. And now we can already start to see that it's going to work between any 2 whole numbers. So I can do that between 2 and 3. So I don't always have to go all the way back to 0 and find the gap between 0 and 1. These are wholes. And if I look closely within, I can already start to work out what the fraction is. And if I actually extend those dividing lines, as shown, it's pretty obvious what fraction that this number line is counting up by. However, to go back through to the process, it's reminding you that we're counting the gaps. So here I have 4 gaps or 4 jumps or 4 segments of distance that is being travelled between two whole numbers. So it's 4 pieces that it's been broken up into between each whole number. So what fraction is cut into 4 pieces? Of course we know that is fourths or quarters. And we record that with a denominator of 4. No surprises there. And now we can start marking these on the number line. 1 quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters. And then we hit 4 quarters, which is the same as 1 whole. Then we'd have 1 and 1 quarter, 1 and 2 quarters, 1 and 3 quarters, and so on. And then when we hit 1 and 4 quarters, well, that's 1 and 1, so it becomes 2 wholes, and so on. So we can work our way through and know what the rest of the number line will be. So this skill is quite simple. It's just a matter of counting the gaps, breaking up the number line based on the pieces, not getting confused by counting the number of notches or number of lines.